welcome to another episode of WJ Live, powered by the Western Journal, equipping you with the truth. My name is George Upper. I'm editor-in-chief of the Western Journal, and I'm joined today by supervising features editor. Is that your title now?
I think so.
Whatever Andrew Shawshaw's title is, as well as crack reporter Michael Austin. And that is actually his full title, crack reporter.
Did I get demoted from Crackerjack, or was that?
No,
I was
he
always
was,
crack-
he
I
was
was
Crackerjack.
Crackerjack.
You're
All right, I'm
crack.
crack.
Yeah.
Okay. I covered crack-related news. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what that means. Today we're going to cover a number of ways in which the left lies to you, including the use of language itself, as well as one claim by Joe Biden that was such a doozy, he even got fact-checked by the mainstream media. That's not something we see very often. But before we get into that, let's talk about the media and its handling of perhaps the biggest news story of the day, biggest continuing story of the day anyway, the George Floyd trial.
Yes. So the media, the left, they've been telling us that this is a cut and dry case, that Derek Chauvin will definitely face murder charges, or at least he should, because it's obvious to anyone that saw the video. But as it turns out, as this trial continues on, both sides are making pretty good cases. The defense has made the case that George Floyd was he had a lethal amount of fentanyl in his system, 11 nanograms. You only need 3 nanograms to overdose and die, so he had almost quadruple that amount. And also, the prosecution, they've made some good arguments. For instance, the knee on the neck, that's actually a procedure that police are taught to do, but what they showed in a video was Chauvin's toes were off the ground, so he was putting his entire body weight on George Floyd's neck. So there's been a lot of back and forth. It's pretty unclear at this point whether Chauvin will face any charges at all. There's a good chance, thanks to some recent testimony from a forensics pathologist, that he actually may get off without even, a manslaughter charge. During her initial testimony, and we put out this story on the Western Journal this past weekend, during her initial testimony, the pathologist said that there's no evidence to suggest he would have died, George Floyd that is, that night, except for the interactions with law enforcement. But then, when she was questioned by the defense about hypothetically, if Floyd was found to be at home with no struggle with police, what would the ruling have been? And she said it would have been a drug overdose because he had so much in his system. And so, the defense, it's becoming clear that the prosecution, they might not be able to prove that there was any intent. And to get a second-degree murder charge, they would have to prove that Chauvin was committing a felony at the time. They might not even be able to prove that.
Right.
And so one of the greatest fears that a lot of us have with this trial is if Chauvin, and it could be justice that he is given a murder charge. It could be justice that he's let off and he's acquitted. But if he is acquitted and if justice is served in that way, there are going to be riots destroying cities probably across the nation. I mean, I imagine it would be at least somewhat similar to what we saw last year.
From the death itself.
Yes. And largely, this problem, I think, has been set up by the media because the media keeps portraying this as a cut and dry case, as George Floyd was clearly murdered, when really there's a lot of gray here. And anyone that watches that video, it's pretty horrific. And the officer, it really seems like he's going above and beyond what he's supposed to do, and he's, it just seems inhumane. But the reality is that the situation is much more complicated than that. And the media has not communicated that to people. And so if Chauvin is acquitted, people are going to think this is a gross injustice and there's just going to be mayhem. So do you guys think that the media have kind of set up this sort of a problem happening if Chauvin is to be acquitted?
I don't think there's any question about that. I mean, when you... From a year ago now, when the case was initially, created with the incident, we have seen that the conversation of this being a gross injustice, this being a racially motivated, hate crime-esque murder of a day-to-day citizen by a police officer. I mean, you start with that narrative, and there's no way that you can't, if you carry that on for a year as they've done, actually result in anything other than a guilty verdict being riots and uprisings, because you have established this frame where everything that passes through it must be a result of this racist framework that has been laid out by the left with regard to this case. And it's incredibly disappointing because, as you said, Michael, I mean, this has been an incredibly back and forth case. It's one of the few times where I'm actually I favor the fact that social media is being used as a method for getting information out, because, every couple hours we're seeing kind of a back and forth. And so hopefully people who are keyed in well enough to the narrative and to what's going on in the news cycle may see the back and forth push and meet some arguments that they haven't faced yet. Unfortunately, that back and forth kind of volleying with the defense and the prosecution, it is going to be drowned out by the fact that the mainstream media will call any not guilty verdict racist, and this will be an injustice of allowing a racist to walk free. Of course, none of these cases in the last several years, no matter how much they bring this issue up, none of these cases, even if it was in some of my in some of these cases, my opinion would be that the officers acted improperly and probably did deserve perhaps a manslaughter charge. They have not in any of these cases proven an actual racist motive that they've discussed for several years now, or several decades now, and they never prove it. But using that frame does immediately get people riled up. You've got a matchbox ready to explode at any moment based upon what this verdict is going to be.
And that's because racism is evil. It's quantifiably evil, and people, including the mainstream media, including most of the viewers of the mainstream media, like simple stories. They like good versus evil. They don't like moral ambiguity. They don't like thinking about the fact that, Hitler had friends and liked dogs. I mean, there's no... You can say that, you should be able to say those things and not sound like you are defending Hitler, right? The fact that they're true all of us have good things about us and bad things about us. That's true of everyone. We all also like to think that we're the good guy. And so when we like narratives that show that the guys in the white hats who are just, always good and always do the right thing and never question themselves. And that's just not life. That's not who Chauvin is. That's not who George Floyd was. Everybody has more than one side to them, but media just does not want to. That's hard to show. That is a difficult story to tell. The easy story to tell is white man bad, just like orange man bad used to be the easy story to tell. And so that's what the media is always going to do here. Then add to that the fact that you have an element in this country that doesn't care what the truth is. They're just waiting for the opportunity to go out and loot and burn and kill and destroy again. That's all they want. It almost doesn't matter what the verdict is. There will be people who celebrate a verdict they agree with by going out and burning stuff. But because if he's guilty, well then cops are bad, and now we're going to riot. And if he's not guilty, well then the judicial system's bad, and now we're going to riot. It doesn't matter.
And we saw with the Dante Wright shooting yesterday. I mean, immediately there were riots. There were shots being fired at the local police station nearby. This stuff is getting really out of hand. It's like you said, it's most likely going to get very out of hand following this trial, no matter what happens.
Guarantee it.
I mean, I believe anything short of a first-degree murder, which he's not going to get, would cause people to go nuts. But it seems inevitable now that this violence is going to happen. Businesses are going to be destroyed, lives may be lost, and it seems like there's nothing we can do about it. How do we get to a point as a society where we can prevent this from happening, where it's not just expected that dangerous riots are going to always follow? My initial thoughts would be, we need to get back to strengthening our police forces so that they can be ready, but that probably won't happen anytime soon.
I mean, for what little my criminal justice education is worth, and it's worth very little.
So it's like much of the rest of your education.
Oh, incredibly deeply.
Okay, good.
Unfortunately, I think that nobody in this country has really an understanding of the criminal justice system, and that doesn't mean go to school for 4 years. I would say don't go to school for 4 years to get a criminal justice degree, in fact. But we need to educate the population that like what they watch on Law and Order is not, and that is generally those good guy, bad guy narratives
Yeah, it
in a
is.
30-minute
Right.
to 45-minute crime
right.
show. Those narratives don't exist. That's not what's at the heart of a human being. That's not what's at the heart of this legal system. What you were talking about a minute ago, Michael, this idea that, you know, nothing short of first-degree murder. Now, generally speaking, first-degree murder is a premeditated murder, right?
premeditated,
In
yeah.
most states, that means this person was lying in wait, not in the heat of the moment, waiting
They
to
planned it.
to victimize someone. Now, nobody understands that. They just think, oh, first degree murder is the really bad murder, and third degree murder is like the less bad murder. That's almost
murdered somebody
manslaughter.
nobody liked anyway.
Yeah. And so there's no understanding of what justice actually means, and that lack of education is killing us. So I think that at the heart of that issue is kind of we need to inform people of what justice actually means and what these charges mean.
And what that can lead to, and what that seems to have led to here, is overcharging. You have,
Right.
you know, society pressures these prosecutors into giving bigger charges because for some reason they think that would mean more, that would be more of a
But if they
mark
don't, then
against
they're
them.
going light on them. And,
Yeah.
and that's not acceptable.
But
either.
that perception so like destroys the aspect of justice, because when you overcharge
it has
in
the
this case
opposite
right
effect that
here,
they're looking for.
in this case right here, there's almost no question that third degree murder is an overcharge here. So manslaughter was the way to go. Go for all the manslaughter charges in the books if you feel like it.
Yeah,
and
just do
all
all
of
of them,
those.
yeah.
I think personally, having looked at the evidence in this case that has been presented, what is actually publicly available, I would say that's a reasonable charge. I would say I would probably convict if I were on that jury. But these murder charges don't make sense. And when you overcharge, you result in the jury essentially being tasked with, you know, deciding yes or no on a question that shouldn't have been asked.
As I have said multiple times on this show, and even more than that in real life, to the point where my wife's probably ready to kick me out of the house. Politics is downstream of culture, but culture is downstream of religion. What is missing is in this situation, as in so many situations, is a humility that says, whatever it is that bad guy over there did, I am completely capable of the same thing. That's just theologically true. We are broken, fallen, imperfect people. And you've heard the expression there, but for the grace of God go I. That's literally true. Like, no matter what bad thing, as much as I don't want to think of myself as doing any of these bad things, I know in my heart of hearts I'm capable of all of them. But the grace of God has given me different upbringing. It's given me education. It's given me conscience. It's given me all, you know, parents who love me, etc. And so I came up in a situation where I'm less likely to perform some crimes, more likely to perform others, actually, but less likely to perform some, like, you know, using my authority against somebody. There are plenty of things I will do, but that's not just something I'm particularly tempted by. If we all just understood that, you know, I don't have anything over this officer. I don't have anything over George Floyd. No. I'm not a better person than they are. Anything that might be to my credit is because of what God has done in my life. It has nothing to do with some sort of innate superiority that I have. Until the American culture experiences that sort of revival that allows that kind of thinking en masse, I don't know that there is an answer to that question, Michael.
Right.
I think we're stuck. I think we're stuck in this endless cycle of, you know, man hates man. We already know that. That's not going anywhere. It's been true since Cain and Abel. And, you know, one side is going to use that crime, whatever the latest one is, to their advantage, to push their narrative. The other side is going to try to hold to some level of truth or push their narrative. And that just is going to be an endless cycle. And no matter how this comes out, there will be people who are aggrieved by it. Some of them rightfully so, probably, because, to your point, Andrew, overcharging means that justice may not be done.
Yeah.
He may not be found guilty of what he actually is guilty of. I don't know that, but that's a real possibility here. And that's not a good solution either. That's not a good result either.
Right.
So there may not be a win to be found here at this point.
And in the way of that, in the way of the education and in the way of the humility that you're talking about are these narrative creatures on either side of the aisle and in the media that could, I'm not going to ascribe negative motive, that could care less if damage is done culturally, societally, financially, criminally. They could care less about that violence as long as they get their narrative, they get their reads, they get their clicks, right? And so these folks don't care what terms they use, they don't care what they do, they don't care what they say. And another fantastic example that I brought to the table today was this idea that last week we learned that everything is infrastructure. Everything is infrastructure.
I'm excited about this one.
Your mom is infrastructure. I mean, we had there was a full-blown meme
Those
war.
were fighting words when I was in high school.
There was a full-blown meme war on Twitter last week in the political landscape over Senator Kristen Gillibrand popping off with a ridiculous tweet because essentially the right has come out against Joe Biden's infrastructure plan, incredibly big spending bill that involves about 9% infrastructural spending and a bunch of other social nonsense. And Kristen Gillibrand said, well, that doesn't matter because Americans agree, I don't know which Americans, but Americans agree, you see, that paid leave is infrastructure, child care is infrastructure, caregiving is infrastructure. So we need to fund all of those things because if we don't have those systems and those foundations financially in this country, if the federal government doesn't get involved and provide child care and caregiving and health care, there is no infrastructure, there's no foundation, there's nothing to build on in this society, and we're all at a loss. This, of course, provoked people all over social media to make a farce of what was said because on the left, everything is everything that it's not. All these words mean absolutely nothing. Hence the joke, your mom is infrastructure. Everyone all over Twitter was saying, this is infrastructure, that's infrastructure. And so then, unfortunately, though, this narrative actually took root, and we have folks on the left and in the on the Democratic side of the aisle pouncing on this decision and saying, we have the Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, saying on Sunday that, quote, we don't want to use past definitions of infrastructure.
Yeah, no.
We don't
Only
want
future
to use
definitions.
the definition. We want to
Right.
change the definition. And this is kind of, it gets back to, I mean, the left does this all the time. Racism. On the last
yes.
topic, racism is no longer hating someone based upon their race. It requires this structural power dynamic element.
Right.
That way, white people can't be victims of racism.
Right.
Yes.
Gender is no longer sex. Those two terms must be separated because it fits the left's trans narrative. And we have the same with infrastructure. It's no longer roads and bridges. It's whatever social program would benefit the Democratic platform and get them votes. So, of course, this goes back to the Clintonian, it depends what the meaning of the word is in his testimony before Congress during his impeachment. And unfortunately, we see this all the time. C.S. Lewis talks about this in Mere Christianity. He talks about the misuse of words and how over time words can be watered down and ruined, right? So his example is the term gentleman. In the past, the word gentleman was created for someone with a coat of arms who was a member of the aristocracy, right? Of course, then it became a nicety, a pleasantry.
Right.
This, Michael, you're a gentleman. George, you're a gentleman. You guys are nice guys. You're gentlemen. So the word gentleman no longer means what it means. And now the word is of no use to anyone because it's just a pleasantry. Infrastructure, racism, gender are becoming the same things because of what the left has done with words. They will manipulate any word to mean anything if it fits their narrative. So what I wanted to kind of talk to you guys about is just what is the danger of this kind of on-the-fly linguistic manipulation, especially at the speeds we're seeing it at now. It's not, generations to change a term. It's overnight. Infrastructure doesn't mean roads and bridges. What is the danger of that?
Well, there's a huge, and you were pointing to this, but there is a huge difference between the way words evolve naturally, like gentlemen, and the way that the left does weaponize words like racism and gender. And it's deliberate and intentional. And what's happening there is that those words retain their relevance, their cachet, but then when you switch the definition, that power just gets redirected at another group. And it's a rhetorical strategy that the left has used for a long time. The gender and sex used to be synonymous, and then it was in the 1970s that John Money started creating kind of the rift between those two. And it is extremely effective. You can get people on your side just because they know the weight of those words, and then when you shift that, they just kind of come along for the ride.
Back before you two were born, there was this little place on the other side of the world called the USSR. And we used to sort of joke in the military in those days that whenever a spokesman for the USSR began a statement with, as is well known, they were about to completely make something up, totally lie off, complete nonsense. That the Democratic version of that today is Americans agree. It's the same thing. When they say Americans agree, the one thing it doesn't matter what they say. The one thing you can be absolutely certain about what they are about to say is that Americans do not agree on it. It's the one thing you can know for sure. What happens when words are degraded, I don't know if you guys have ever heard me say this before, but politics may be downstream of culture, but culture is downstream of religion. Have I ever mentioned that?
I've not heard that term before. This phrase.
But it goes back to, for me, this goes back to whenever I hear anybody talking about the importance of words, the erosion of meaning or definition, it goes back to an attempt by fallen man to erode the power of the Word of God, because the Word of God is important and it puts demands on us. It puts requirements on us, and we don't like that. I don't like it. I just want to do what I want to do, right? I just want to eat jelly beans all day. Okay, maybe not jelly beans,
gross.
but yeah, you know what I'm saying. I just want to do what I want to do. I don't want to think that there is an outside standard of behavior that I am required to meet, and required to meet perfectly, actually, is the standard. I don't like that idea. And so if you can put me in a place where I've got a Bible in front of me and I can say legitimately to everybody around me, yeah, but that's not really what it means, then I'm much more comfortable. Now my suppositions, my behavior, my attitudes, my thinking, my own selfishness, whatever, those things aren't challenged anymore. I can just dismiss those requirements of me. And I don't think Granholm or any of these people are going, okay, here's how we get rid of the Bible. I don't think that's their plan, but that is an absolute, unquestionable consequence of that kind of bad thinking. It's bad thinking.
And so kind of just in the day-to-day and in the kind of rhetorical political sense, how on earth are conservatives supposed to combat these shifts in what words mean and these shifts in narratives when, these things change overnight, and so you see... I've said this multiple times on the show before, conservatives have a tendency to fall behind the curve on things like this, and they completely miss it. And so some will argue, oh, well, it doesn't matter if they change the word, just keep using the word in the way that it's meant to be used. And that's all well and good, but if we come to a debate with different ideas of what the terms in the debate mean, we can't have a discussion in this country. Right. And so how do you combat this in the day-to-day with, friends, colleagues, folks across the aisle? How the heck do you kind of say, we need to get on this and say, this is what these words mean. And until we have that, we can't move on to what is the solution to these problems.
Yeah, you have to say something, and really you have to say something along these lines. It's pretty simple. Look, to have a discussion about whatever the topic is, we have to first agree on the terms. We have to start there. It doesn't really matter what the agreement is. We could decide, no, you know what, we're not going to define it that way anymore. We're going to define it this way. Okay. I mean, that happens, and sometimes that's useful because our knowledge changes, or, what we thought was one thing is now another thing. Okay, that's fine. But first you have to agree on the terms, and if you can't agree on the terms, you can't even have civil discourse. You cannot have a meaningful conversation, never mind debate. You can't have a meaningful conversation because I'm saying, my wife and I do this all the time. I'm saying XYZ and she hears ABC, and we're trying to communicate. We're not trying to obfuscate anything. We're trying to be on the same page, and we just aren't. And so usually we find a place where I know I said XYZ, but you didn't hear that, did you? Tell me what you heard, and we can figure that out. But you have to have people of goodwill who are actually going to do that. And when you are, so it depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to a classical liberal, a free speech believing classical liberal, they're all there with you. You can absolutely get to the other side of this conversation with those folks. If you're talking to a leftist, stop. Why are you talking to a leftist? Yeah. You can't. You're totally wasting your time unless they come to you, and this is rare, but it can happen. They come to you and say, "Tell me what you think about this thing. I'm trying to understand the position on the other side." But that's not what leftists do, generally speaking. That's what classical liberals do. They want to understand, but leftists don't. They just want to conquer. They just want power. And so if you're talking to a leftist, my advice is don't. Just stop. Seriously, walk
Yeah.
away. Be nice. Don't, put tape over their mouths and then walk away. But, be polite, but walk away. You're wasting your time.
And another solution I was going to bring up is a lot of those free speech liberals, like George is mentioning. Those people agree with us on this issue. There are plenty of reasons. The Brett Weinsteins, the liberals you'd find writing for Quillette, those kind of people.
Dave Rubin.
We need to build coalitions with those. Dave Rubin's
Yes.
more of a
He
conservative
is more
at this
of a conservative
point,
now.
but
Compared
He's getting there.
compared to
in terms of the far left stuff, especially, there was a lot of those sorts of classical free speech liberals that were excited about Biden and are not at all anymore.
you're right.
And
You are
building
right.
up those coalitions now, it's going to provide a lot of benefits later down the road, and they'll be willing to fight with us against issues like this. And so, I would suggest that's probably a good strategy going forward.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. One of the reasons that those folks don't like Biden so much as they once did is because Biden is being Joe Biden. He is not the guy that we didn't get to know during the campaign because he wouldn't come out of his basement. He's actually being Joe Biden and speaking somewhat off the cuff at times and revealing who he actually is. Even a handful of establishment media types seem to be becoming aware of this fact. On Friday, he made a statement talking about in his weekly economic briefing. He said, quote, "The average rapist rapes about 6 times." You can see how that would be relevant in a weekly economic briefing. I'm not sure exactly why he felt the need to bring this statistic up. And I should put air quotes around statistic, by the way. The average, I don't even know what average rapist means.
Yeah.
The average, your run-of-the-mill rapist. They rape about 6 times. That was on Friday. Very early this morning, or late last night, the Washington Post, of all people, fact-checked President Joe Biden. And I actually like to bring attention to the fact when a left-leaning outlet like the Washington Post calls out one of their own. And I like to do that for 2 reasons. One, it means that whatever Biden did was egregious, right? If the Post feels like, well, we can't even ignore that one, because they'd like to. But the other thing is, I know you're not reading the Washington Post, and you shouldn't. It's a waste of your time. So you might not be aware of this if we didn't talk about it. So that's why one of the things I like to say the Western Journal does is read these rags so that you don't have to. And this is a good example of that. So during his briefing, the president was talking about a budget proposal, and that includes funding for programs funded by the Violence Against Women Act of 1994, which he helped get passed through Congress.
And in case you didn't
when he
know,
was in the
George,
Senate.
before 1994, when that act passed, violence against women was actually legal in the United States.
Exactly. Now, he was the one who Joe Biden came and said, you know what? We've had enough violence against women. Let's stop that. So, and as you know, there has been no violence against women since 1994. So that's good, because that's what legislation does. It always fixes the problem. But actually, in this case, it didn't fix the problem, which is why they need more funding for it. Figure that out. He's doubling down on something that isn't working. Look, I'm not pro-violence against women. Don't send me those letters. That's ridiculous. But there are better ways to address it than Congress figuring out a one-size-fits-all solution, which is true of essentially every problem that's ever existed in the history of man. So back to the statistic. The average rapist rapes 6 times. Mary P. Koss, who's a Regents professor in the College of Public Health at the University of Arizona, has said that Biden should withdraw this statement. She said, quote, "The president's statement, sadly, should be corrected to advise policymakers on the basis of sound scientific evidence." Now, you can go to the Washington Post and read this 4-page fact check they did. I wouldn't bother, because I'm going to sum it up for you really quickly here. But you can. It's all there. Essentially, there's a lot of debate in the social sciences about whether or not this statistic means anything. And there's a lot of question about the methodology used by the scientists who created this study in the first place. There is one person who really strongly defends this original scientific study. You know who that person is?
I have no idea.
It's the guy who did it.
Yeah.
The guy
well,
who did that
you don't
study
say.
he's really convinced that that number is the right number.
Yeah.
Pretty much everyone else is like, yeah, is it though? Is that the right number? There are a lot of I'll just give you a couple of really quick reasons. One is the people who were talked to were mostly, first of all, they were self-identified. So there were people on college campuses going around and saying, hey, how many people have you raped lately? And then and if somebody said, oh, yeah, I'm one of those guys, I raped. I'm exaggerating, but only a little bit.
This is ridiculous.
These are the people they talked to. And so they asked them questions that were more subtle than that, obviously. But the idea was to identify behavior that would fall under the category, probably more along the idea of sexual assault than rape.
Yeah.
So we already have that problem. We have the line blurred between sexual assault and rape. We have all of these samples being taken on college campuses, so you're not getting a national sample at all. It's not representative of all the rapists in the country. I don't know how you would get that sample, but it ain't doing it this way. And they're all self-identified. These are all people who said, yeah, I engaged in this behavior that you consider questionable. Ask me some more questions about it. I'm happy to tell you about it. That's ridiculous. So because of the nature of the scientific debate, the Washington Post would normally, according to them, give this statement by Joe Biden 2 Pinocchios. That they have their 1 to 4 Pinocchio scale. Buried literally at the very bottom of the fact check, it says, given the academic dispute, we consider this a 2 Pinocchio claim. Where are we in culture where that's a phrase? A 2 Pinocchio claim. But because the president turned a study about campus rape into a statistic about the average rapist, he earns 3 Pinocchios. So not only is the study bad, according to the fact check, according to the Washington Post, but Biden used it badly. So he took bad information and used it in a way it wasn't even intended to be used in the first place. And to their credit, Washington Post called him on it. That's admirable. I'm glad that they did that. That's what they're supposed to do. We've seen a handful of these fact checks lately from establishment media sources like the Washington Post. So, guys, is this a sign that the media is somehow turning on Joe Biden, or at least maybe that they've realized that holding politicians accountable is like part of their job description?
I think it's more that, look, since Trump left, there's been kind of a lull in news for a little while now, and there's an incentive for them now to actually check him on a lot of the lies that he says. You know, beforehand, it was probably more in their benefit to, stay strong with the party, go against Trump. But now, not as much is going on, and there's this wealth of opportunity to fact check things that Joe Biden says. So I think you'll see it, either continue. There's been several fact checks recently on him from these sorts of places, and I think you'll continue to see that. Maybe that'll uptick a little bit because there's no Trump. There's no Trump for them to fact check
him.
Yeah, and they don't have to protect him, and they don't have that big figure that everyone hates so much that they can fact check. So
I'm sure they put all their fact-checking resources into Donald Trump when he was in office.
Well, call me a pessimist, but George, and I'm sure our pastor will love being taken out of context, but he says Christians are not natural optimists. That is what Brian says. So I am not optimistic about this issue.
I'm not sure that's exactly what he meant, but yeah, okay.
I am not optimistic about this. I feel like every time that the Washington Post comes out or New York Times comes out with a fact check on Joe Biden, every 6 months or so, there's one out of, the myriad ridiculous claims that he's made. They bring them up and they say, in the words of Joe Biden, this is a big bleeping deal. And so they make a big deal out of it and they say, oh, well, this is, maybe they're finally turning. And I just have seen enough times for them to just not actually turn and change their behavior. I think it's either the broken clock is right twice a day scenario, or it's the At the end of the day, kind of, you have to, once in a while, to restore any semblance of credibility, you have to hold your own accountable from time to time. He's easy to sacrifice up.
Yeah.
He
Well, that's a good
presents
point.
himself
Yeah.
constantly
Yes.
for it. And kind of on top of that, you have, it's the same thing that, in my personal opinion, I think the Fox News picking Arizona for Joe Biden was kind of the same deal, where it was like, well, the election is going decently for Donald Trump. We can look a little bit less biased here at Fox News if we pick,
Yeah.
the other
No,
guy.
that's definitely what it is.
With this
Yeah.
state.
Yeah.
And I think that with this, it's the same deal, where they're like, well,
Yeah.
we've given him enough ground. We can kind of trip him up a little bit once in a great while.
And preserve our reputation, what left of
Yes.
What little there
whatever
is.
they have. All right, so now it's time for another episode of my favorite game, Confused or Corrupt. So give me your best guess. Is Joe Biden confused? Is he unaware that this statistic that he's citing is essentially useless? Or is he corrupt? Is he fully aware that it is a bad statistic that he's using in the wrong way in order to purposefully deceive the American people to get what he wants? Is he confused or corrupt?
If Joe Biden is corrupt, he is the criminal mastermind that they said Donald Trump was. This
Yeah.
guy isn't even operating in our reality. Confused.
Yeah.
No, he's confused.
All
No,
right.
confused is definitely the right answer here, and it is always the right answer whenever we're talking about stumbling, bumbling Joe Biden. Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing. So this was. Did you say they were talking about economics at this meeting?
Yes.
And then he brought it up.
Because it can't. The spending is in his budget proposal.
My guess would be he has a bunch of social justice things he's supposed to run through that the people around him tell him, all right, here's a statistic for this, here's
that's
what you're supposed to say
interesting.
about this. And he's always waiting for an opportunity to say, oh, yeah, this about the racism and
the average
rape.
racist raped 6 times. Yeah, right.
Exactly. So,
Well, so I guess that's unanimous then, because
that would be confusion with corruption around him.
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying.
Surrounded by
confused man
a confused
surrounded by
man
corruption.
being
used.
puppeted by corrupt people.
I think that's probably a pretty fair assessment.
Yeah.
I as wrong as I think Joe Biden is most of the time, I don't think he's any more corrupt than the average politician.
No,
I
no.
think, and I believe the average politician is pretty corrupt.
Yeah.
Is your average Joe.
But I don't think he's any worse than
Yeah.
that. He just seems like kind of your average guy. But yeah, he's confused. He is so confused. My great concern is that something will happen to him, and Kamala Harris, who is not confused, in my opinion, winds up in that seat. So please, President Biden, please take good care of yourself.
You get the opposite every time we play this game with her. It's corrupt.
Yeah, exactly. So we will pray for Joe Biden's health to keep him in office as the lesser of two evils, for sure.
Yeah, take one of those chair escalators up the stairs next time.
Yeah,
Don't worry about-
exactly. Don't
worry
you
about
got nothing to
walking.
prove.
Yeah.
You got nothing to prove,
Yeah.
Mr. President. You just take good care of yourself.
Yes.
And on that note, we are out of time at WJ Live. We're so glad that you joined us today. Thank you, gentlemen, for a fun conversation. We are here every day, as long as that day is a Monday, a Wednesday, or a Friday.
Laughing.
Yeah, you're right. I was going to get through that with a straight face, except the control room just laughed audibly. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific. It's not. I got used to saying every day. We
Yeah.
did that for months. God, I can't win on this show. You can find us here every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 5 p.m., 2 p.m. Eastern. We are going to break down the topics of the day for you, just like we do every day that we're here. And find us on YouTube at youtube.com/WJ Live. We would love to have you subscribe there. Click that bell so that you are notified every time a new episode comes out, for as long as Apple lets you be notified of that. They don't want you watching any of this. And we will continue to bring you the truth as best we know how to do it every time we're here. Thanks again for watching us. Stay safe. See you next time.
The Western Journal has rolled out a brand new subscription model designed specifically for readers like you, who want the unvarnished truth that the establishment media won't tell you. Our multi-tiered plans give you exactly what you want, and help us fight fake news during this, the most important election of our lives. Become a subscriber to the Western Journal today and unlock exclusive features you won't find anywhere else. It's easy. Just follow the prompts in this video to join us in equipping